Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on understanding teacher burnout in U.S. schools. Here at the George Washington University's Graduate School of Education and Human Development, we are lucky to have faculty who study the many complexities within education from varying angles. Over the next few months, we are excited to bring you a series of webinars that are going to look at the U.S. teacher shortage from a variety of viewpoints, including educators, administrators, policymakers, and even psychologists. Today, we have Dr. Beth Tuckwiller, who will join us to speak about teacher burnout. This is one of her areas of expertise even before the major U.S. teaching shortage began. She is an associate professor of special education and disability studies, and she teaches both master's and doctoral students here at our school. After Dr. Tuckwiller's talk, we invite you to stay for a short Q&A. As she presents, please feel free to begin typing in your questions into the chat box within our Zoom session. Dr. Tuckwiller, thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm thrilled to be able to spend time in this community talking about what is a very important issue. I hope today to be able to share some different and divergent perspectives about the teacher burnout issue that's related to the teacher shortage, and I hope that will help stimulate some conversation and some different thinking around this critical and urgent issue. With that said, before I move into talking a little bit about teacher burnout and the teacher shortage and ways we can think about that and potential paths for what we can do, I do want to clarify the lexicon that's often used in this space. We hear a lot about teacher burnout, but we also might hear a lot about teacher stress. It's important that we understand the difference between those words. Stress, if I think of it in its simplest form, is often the presence of something that is too much, something that overwhelms. Significant strain in any domain of life can cause us stress. When we're talking about teacher stress in a professional setting, we're talking about that feeling of overwhelm. There are too many things to do, too much to focus on, that feeling of kind of getting buried under that. Burnout, when we reach the point of burnout, and I'm going to talk to you in just a second about kind of the cascade that leads to that. Most simply put, burnout is when there's not enough left in us. So when stress is too much, burnout is not enough. It's a work-oriented construct where we go through a pretty predictable progression of experiences that lead us to a place where we might feel like we don't have the energy, the investment, the physical energy, the emotional and mental focus to be able to do this anymore. So when we talk about teacher burnout, we're talking about kind of an end point after a long, predictable cascade of events that has occurred that are frequently focused in on stress, the presence of too much of other things kind of going on that remain unaddressed. So I thought it would be useful to clarify those words as we get started. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the burnout cascade. Plenty of research has indicated that teachers as a group, and I was a teacher for many years, teachers, and I still am a teacher in higher ed, but teachers in K-12 and pre-K-12 spaces particularly as a group are thought to be at high risk for burnout, which also means high risk for attrition from the field. And we've probably seen no starker example of that than what's happening right now in terms of teacher stress, eventual burnout, and then what's been referred to as the Great Resignation, the teacher shortage. Burnout can be somewhat predicted by what's happening around an individual. Initially, and you can take a look at this kind of cascade of events, initially, and all of us experience these exposures to chronic sources of stress. What makes that stress a risk factor for burnout is when it remains unmanaged in some way. The stress piles on, and we don't have a good way to manage that stress. We can think of stress management kind of broadly in two ways. One is either change the stressor, eliminate the stressor in some way, or two, develop effective coping mechanisms to manage that stressor in a way that's healthy. As we attempt to manage that stress, number two in this cascade, burnout is a risk when we're not managing it successfully, whether we're not able to eliminate the stressor or whether we are not coping in ways that are working for us personally. And the ways that we cope can be very individualized. As we continue to experience chronic stressors and not manage them in a way or be able to cope with them in a way that will work for us, that leads to increasing exhaustion and depletion. And that's that beginning of that feeling of not enough, right? It's harder to get up in the morning. It's harder to get to work. It's more difficult to do all of the incredible things that teachers do every day that require so much energy, so much focus. As that continues to happen over time, teachers often feel a sense, and 4 and 5 are interchangeable. They often start to feel like, I'm not good at this anymore. I'm not efficacious at my job. I don't have what it takes to do this job well. And that can lead to feelings of increasing cynicism about themselves as effective teachers, depersonalization, where to kind of survive, they'll separate themselves kind of emotionally from the role. And even that checking out or quiet quitting phenomenon that we've been hearing so much about. When that happens, we have watched a cascade of events that have occurred in and around a teacher. And that's what we mean when we talk about burnout and the cascade that leads to it. There's plenty of research that says teachers are at high risk for burnout. But what do we often hear about teacher burnout and why it's happening and what teachers should do? One of the most widely proffered solutions at this point in the research and has become quite popular is the notion of self-care. The idea that if we get more sleep, that if we engage in a meditation practice or a mindfulness or keep gratitude journals or attend to our nutrition, that we can stave off stress and burnout. Certainly this can work for some people, but I would offer the current landscape of education as an example that it does not work for all people. That solution focuses in, you may have noticed, on the individual, making choices and engaging in activities to manage stress and eventual burnout. Some people have kind of bravely and courageously suggested that there might be systemic issues around teacher burnout. And you're seeing this in media stories about, districts need to hire more assistants or more teachers, or we need to provide teachers with, increased salaries to get them to stay. Certainly, I endorse, increasing the number of staff in schools and paying teachers, compensating them in ways that are more just, fair, that, with an increased salary. But these types of solutions and foci can often lead us to incomplete understandings and explanations, and to be frank, at times, fundamental misattributions of teacher burnout's root causes. So I'll sum up my concerns here with kind of two statements. One, who are the experts who have decided that teacher burnout can be attributed to either a lack of individual behaviors around self-care or lack of staff or the need for increased salary? Who are they? Who's creating that narrative? And two, is that narrative correct? I think that's a very important question, because it is absolutely ubiquitous across the nation right now that these are the issues. So what causes teacher burnout is my question, and are the explanations we're currently thinking about correct? And the answer to that question honestly depends on a lot of factors. It depends on who you ask, it depends on how you ask that question, and it depends on where you ask that question. Okay, the local context around educators, schools, and districts. I will offer the observation that there are many, many people in the public eye who feel quite entitled and comfortable commenting on teacher issues. That includes educational researchers, that includes teachers unions, school district leaders, politicians. All of these folks are at the head of the class, if you will, in declaring root causes and solutions. But you might have noticed that teachers were not on my list of those authorized experts who are talking about this. That's not an oversight on my part. Teachers' voices have not been acknowledged, much less centered in this concerning cultural chronicle that we're experiencing right now. All too often, the evidence generated by the people who are speaking the loudest and getting the most press time is driven by preconceived notions that can be skewed by either top-down research approaches, where researchers are testing out self-care strategies, and that's what's getting the attention, or constrained by political agendas about from unions or from politicians, but nonetheless narratives that are really plagued by a real lack of teacher input. So when that's happening, here's what we end up seeing. The result of that leads to headlines such as all the ones you've been seeing over the last couple of years. Teachers are not okay, even though we need them to be. How burned out are you? A scale for teachers. The fact that someone developed a scale for that in 2022 is quite telling. Educators report the highest level of burnout among all industries. We see the headlines. People are talking about burnout and talking about this issue, but how we talk about it and the words we use are so critically important. So look at this next headline with me. This is a headline recently from 2022, why teachers are burning out and leaving districts scrambling to fill jobs. If we just dissect that discourse for just a moment quickly, and I won't belabor the point, but it assigns the action of burning out to teachers. It makes it their action that they're engaged in. Teachers are for some reason burning out and they're leaving districts scrambling to fill jobs. That type of language, the word choice, leaves us with that feeling, when we leave someone scrambling, we usually think of somebody who's kind of the victim of someone else's irresponsibility or someone who didn't show up and now someone else has to scramble, to get things done. The way that we're talking about this issue places so much focus on teachers as not doing something they need to do or not doing something right. And it's really, that means what we're doing is we're not holding the systems around teachers to account for what is going on. But I think another important thing for us to talk about quickly is that this is not a new phenomenon, teacher stress and teacher burnout. All of these headlines are since we've been doing pandemic teaching, but let's take a look at other headlines that have been out there in the world, like teacher stress and emotional exhaustion focus in 2016, causes of burnout, 2016, teacher stress and assessment for stress reduction in 2010, even back to 2000, over 20 years ago, burnout in teachers, shattered dreams of impeccable professional performance. This is not a new phenomenon. It's getting a lot of attention right now because of the teacher shortage, because of what's being referred to as the Great Resignation, but none of this is new. But it sure does feel urgent now that teachers have taken, in some ways, a political stand and said, I can't do this anymore. I can't work in these conditions anymore. I would ask us to consider the question, when a whole profession is at risk for burnout, should we continue to focus the problem and thus solutions as belonging solely to the individuals in that profession? Or should we start to talk about what's going on in this profession where everyone in this profession is at risk for burnout? So when I think about this type of question, I start to wonder why there's so much focus, just for instance, not to pick on it, I've done my own research in this space, but why there's so much focus on self-care. There are teacher self-care programs, research studies, professional developments. This language so invoked that teachers need to engage in self-care to prevent burnout assigns responsibility to whom for not burning out? Teachers, you guessed it. It's not just inaccurate, it's actually an uncaring statement that does not acknowledge exploitive practices within systems, unreasonable expectations, unfunded mandates, and the complexities of teaching through a global pandemic. It doesn't acknowledge that. It focuses in on teachers taking care of themselves. So drawing attention away from those systemic issues is a big concern of mine. And I would say we need to revise our statements, perhaps away from, a common statement. To mitigate teacher burnout, teachers need to engage in more self-care. I would offer a revision to that and suggest that a more accurate statement might be school system, policies and practices are leading to teacher burnout. And what can we do about that? And focus our attention on the systems around teachers. So how we talk about this is extremely important. But what do we do, right? So what we know then, that it's not just about teachers not managing stress or not engaging in enough self-care. We know that there are a lot of systemic issues going on around teachers. One is acknowledging the unique experiences of teachers who have a lot of different intersecting identities. Not all teachers are the same. Not all experiences of teaching are the same. I would offer that we need to be engaging with more critical frames when we're talking about issues of professional burnout among our teacher workforce. I would also suggest that until solutions center teacher voices and respond to the expressed needs of teachers and different groups of teachers, systems will continue to burn teachers out. There's a distinction in this need response literature of assumed needs and expressed needs. Assumed needs are when those who have power make assumptions about the people about whom they are making decisions. And expressed needs are the expressed in any number of ways, verbally and writing, through behaviors, the expressed needs of the group about whom those in power are speaking. So an example of this is a number of phone calls I received from reporters reporting on the teacher shortage in the last few months, asking me, we don't understand, our district offered a $3,000 signing bonus and they're going to hire more instructional assistants. Why are we not seeing any of these vacancies being filled? And I would suggest that that's because teachers did not express a need for a $3,000 signing bonus or 2 or 3 more instructional assistants to be spread across their school. They were expressing the need, for example, going back to what needs the teachers are expressing, they're saying things to us that are critically important. They say that when they are trusted and respected as professionals, when they can share in school level decision making about curriculum, what's happening in that school space, when they hear words of affirmation and respect for the work that they do in shaping young lives every day, that they can experience bonus. In my last 10 years of research, teachers have repeatedly told me that when systems understand the centrality of positive relationships in a school community and in a school building, and they support those strong connections among adults in the building, when they feel that their diverse experiences, their diverse wisdom is honored and incorporated into school culture, when they're working in appropriately resourced work environments, they can experience teacher well-being. They've told me that they can thrive when they can turn on the news and hear admiration and deep respect from communities and society recognizing their noble work and filling their buckets up with that acknowledgement, given that they pour themselves out into their students and into their communities every day. And that's quite different than what teachers often hear. Unfortunately, and this is to give thanks to a colleague of mine, Callie, for helping me put this together, this idea of how we represent the disconnect in terms of relationships in schools that places teachers at such high risk for burnout. When teachers need connection and interpersonal relationships to do the incredibly complex work that they do, if we look at the systems and how they're set up around teachers are over here, on this end of the road, doing their work in their classrooms, hopefully being able to collaborate with a grade level team, having time to do that, not at night. And then school leaders sometimes are a step removed. Some school building leaders push in, they provide extensive support, and teachers who have that report that they are much less stressed and much less burned out. Some leaders keep distance or maintain hierarchical structures within the building that can make teachers feel dismissed, disrespected, or not appreciated or seen. And then we think about central office or district leaders or policymakers not even being on the same road, right? They're way over there. We have to understand that administrators, school building leaders, and district leaders have an understanding of the centrality of care relations across school systems, and how important that is to educator well-being and resilience, their ability to stay in their work and to do their work well. District leaders, for example, could have dialogue with teachers, develop interpersonal relationships with teachers, invite them to the table as district level policies are being created so that teacher voice is represented. That would be one way to dismantle some of the hierarchical structures that continue to keep distance between teachers and those who are making decisions about them that we can see are not working well for them. School building leaders can support school cultures that are based in care, respect, mutual admiration and acknowledgement, and push in with their teachers to create that sense of community. I'm not at all suggesting that increased salaries, increased staffing, and other types of things are not important as well, but these human elements of being a teacher and being involved in a school community don't get enough attention. So, this is not a $3,000 bonus. This is not hiring one more paraprofessional. This is a cultural shift, a paradigmatic shift, that connected and collaborative leadership models, inviting teachers to sit at the table, could become revolutionary in how schools and districts currently operate and could have significant effects for teachers. So I'll leave you with a thought, and that is that we're likely far overdue in very explicitly naming teacher burnout as a system level issue rather than just
Okay,
you have a responsibility to challenge the structures that burn teachers out and support prioritizing cultures of equity, responsivity, and care that honor teachers as humans and not just human resources who are expendable through burnout. So I'm encouraged to see headlines like this beginning to take root. Schools, not teachers, must reduce stress and burnout, and here's how. So I'd offer that as a parting thought for us to be thinking about. And thank you for coming and for being here today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tuckwiller, for your very informative presentation and talk. We'll start a short Q&A right now. For those of you in the audience, please go ahead and type questions into the chat box and I'll read them off to Dr. Tuckwiller. But we actually have a few already, so I'll go ahead and start with those. The first question that came in was actually, what are some more examples of teachers' needs right now? I know you mentioned a few. Are there any others that you can think of that might be pressing for teachers?
Absolutely. What we've heard recently from teachers, beyond, again, acknowledging that there are needs for increased salary, more staff in schools. Certainly those are needs, but what we're also hearing that isn't getting nearly the press are things like, I need flexible leave policies during a global pandemic. We need to have proactive systems in place in our school to provide coverage so that I don't have 50 or 55 students in my class because our substitute pool is low, and I'm covering, you know, these classes for people. But they're also telling us beyond those kind of school level flexible leave and coverage for classes, they're also telling us that they need to not turn the news on at 6 p.m. every night and hear how, teachers who didn't want to come back last year were lazy or just trying to get out of working. There is a practice, a cultural narrative of teacher blaming that is pervasive and that is tolerated to some extent in our culture. They need to be, it's not only about schools and districts, it's also about how we as a society choose to honor or not honor teachers. So having all these different levels of understanding, flexibility, and that comes down to respect for teachers as highly educated professionals who know how to do their jobs, who want to engage in the noble work that they do, and having that be acknowledged, respected, and given the space that they need to do that job well, rather than being, essentially constrained by policies and lack of resources and attitudes and beliefs that very negatively affect their ability to do their job.
Our next question, I'm actually going to combine a comment that we received with a question that we received. So as a combo, I'll ask you, as someone preparing for a career in school administration or district administration, what are ways to help foster a healthy environment for teachers? And then sort of another part of the question is, how do students fit into this story? Is there anything that I guess I shouldn't ask that students should do, but does that affect teacher burnout in any way?
Great questions. So I'll answer them in order. I have such incredible colleagues in educational leadership and administration here at GW and have done a great deal of research and collaborative work with that incredible group of faculty. And one of the things that we have talked about is the need to acknowledge the traditional kind of hierarchical structures that are happening in schools that maintain distance. This distance issue seems to be this it's an emotional, it's an interpersonal, it's a cultural way of being in schools where there's distance between leaders, even in the school building sometimes, but certainly at the district kind of central office level, and certainly distance from policymakers who are writing federal policy and state level policymakers writing state level policy. If there's a way to collapse that distance, which would require, convening groups of teachers who want to be involved in having conversations with leaders, sharing their experiential wisdom and knowledge with leaders, being at the table when big decisions are being made about, are we going to change a curriculum or are we going to change policies about certain things? Teachers have such extraordinary knowledge and understanding of their students, and being allowed to share that and being welcome to share that I say a round table, meaning there's shared power in that space where, again, that teacher wisdom and knowledge is tapped. I think is an important big first step. And I think if I could say kind of one thing about that, it would be, where do you see a distancing between teachers and the people who are making decisions about them, and how do you close that space? How do you create an interpersonal connection? So I would offer that. In terms of students, I have yet to find a teacher who has told me that they left because of the students. Teachers love their students. What they say to me is quite the opposite. They say, I love my students. It was, if I left or if I'm planning to leave, it breaks my heart to leave my students. But I don't have what I need, to do this work anymore. And so I I don't identify students as a point of intervention, if you will, in the issue. Students often, relationships with students seem to sustain teachers, but what we're seeing is that that's not enough to necessarily keep them in the field when the systems around them are not functioning well.
Makes sense. Another question is actually it's more about the headlines that you shared. So before the headlines shifted to teacher shortages, the headlines were often more about teacher pay and teacher strikes. Do you think there's been a connection between these two trends of headlines?
That's a great question. What I think, and I have, again, some incredibly knowledgeable colleagues at this school. And one colleague in particular recently was featured, some comments were featured about employees. This colleague is in organizational theory. And they were speaking about employees realizing I can't do the exhausting all day long, no boundaries between work and life, constantly expected to work, responding to emails at 10 p.m. It's too much. And employees, I think, are pushing back. And I think that in some ways we saw that beginning even, as you note, with teacher union work and the teacher strikes that were going on. And those weren't just about money, right? Those were about working hours and resources and having what you need. So I don't think that they're unrelated. I don't think that I have no evidence to suggest there's a causal relationship, but I don't think that they're unrelated. And I do think that the pandemic and what schools and students and families and teachers and everyone has gone through has really laid bare a lot of inequities and intolerable work conditions, completely unreasonable expectations, unfunded mandates that came out that disproportionately negatively affected teachers, and not just negatively affected them in terms of demands placed on them, but internally negatively affected their perception of themselves as having the ability to do the job. So I see it all as very interrelated.
Thank you. Looks like our last question is coming in, and I know we're right at time, so we'll take one or two more. So let's see. As someone who's interested in going into K through 12 teaching, what should I look for in a school to protect myself from burnout?
It's a wonderful, wonderful question. The fact that you're already thinking about it is a protective factor. Having the awareness of the cascade and the awareness of what to do to proactively address it is so important. I cannot stress enough the importance of relationships to teachers. Asking a school building leader about the culture of relationships, cultures of care, cultures of acknowledgement, recognition, and appreciation, how that works in their school. Our grade level teams connected? Do they have strong interpersonal relationships where they can engage in deep professional work? What happens when you need to make some big decisions? Can you count on colleagues to come around the table with you? And do you have that set of supports around you? And I think that asking about those cultures of care and those cultures of connection can be an important part of you interviewing a school too. So you're right, you want to go into teaching and you're going to be interviewed and you'll be fabulous. But you also should be interviewing that school. And I would really encourage you to ask those types of questions. It's important to also understand what are the resources at the school, what are the expectations, what are the typical barriers, and what are the typical strengths. But those adult to adult connections in schools keep emerging in my own research as central, crucial, and core to teachers feeling good about the work they're doing, developing and maintaining a sense of efficacy, demonstrating what we think of as educator resilience, the ability to keep coming back and doing the job, even when it's really hard, and ultimately staying in the field and being career teachers, not teachers for just a few years. So that's my quick answer, but you should email me and we can chat more about that.
So much, Dr. Tuckwiller, and also to our audience for your attention on this critical topic. If you are interested in learning more about the training that our school offers teachers and administrators, please reach out to our admission office and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about what program might be the right fit, and to just provide more information on this topic in general. And we hope to see you all join us at our next webinar, and you can find information on that on our website in the admissions section. Thanks again for joining. Bye, everyone.